Hello and good morning. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to give another couple of minutes for people to join, and then we will get going with Mario and Mark. Hello, Mario. We'll give it one more minute to see a few people joining now, and then we'll get going. Right, so I think there's a few people on here now, and it's 4 minutes past or 3 minutes past 10, so we will get cracking as there's lots to cover. So firstly, thanks for joining the webinar today. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity and cyber attack containment. Before we get going, I'll hand over to Mario and Mark, just a little bit of housekeeping. So for everyone who's joined, the microphones are automatically muted, but we do encourage questions throughout, and we're going to have a little Q&A at the end. So any questions at any time, please do ask, and that's relatively, really straightforward to do. And that is on the side of your screen, you should have a kind of a panel bar, and there should be a question section on there. If you put your questions in on that at any point, I'll get this through, we'll monitor that, and then at the end we'll come to questions and ask that to Mario and Mark. So that leaves me to hand over to our presenters today and to introduce themselves. So I will quickly make Mario presenter and we will get going. Over to you, Mario.
Thank you. David, you might have to do the slides for me, unfortunately, if you wouldn't mind putting the slides up.
I could certainly do that then. Cool.
Okay, can everyone see the slides? I can't see them on my screen, sorry.
We won't be able to find out, but we should be able to, so let's crack on.
Perfect. Okay, well, if we go to the next slide. So I'm Mario, CTO here at Curve Transform. Just to give those of you who don't know who Curve are a very brief overview. So we're a managed service provider, predominantly based out of the UK, but we've got a number of offices across the globe. Our business is built up of a number of technology practices, which I'll go through on the next slide, please, David. So we're doing something a little bit different in the market. As a business, we've gone out and acquired a number of really great businesses that are experts in the technology fields that they work in. But rather than doing what we see a lot of in the IT industry of buying up businesses, joining them all together, we feel that ultimately ends up in a poor customer service and customer experience, but also employee engagement. So what we've done is very much keep those businesses as individual practices and not try to interfere or break all the things that made them, great businesses to work with. So we retain the management teams, all of the staff, all of the systems, all of the processes, but provide support as a collaborative group. We've got 5 key technology areas. Our collaboration and compliance practice, which very self-explanatory, but we focus on technologies such as Microsoft Teams, contact center solutions, Curve Digital, which is our Power Platform Dynamics data and application development division, Curve Experience, which is our contact center practice, but also as our own in-house Microsoft Teams driven VoIP solution called Voxivo. Curve Transform, which is the practice that I'm from, and this is the managed service arm of the business. And Curve Connect, which is everything networking, SD-WAN, and security. We work with an array of different vendors in this space, but I think you can see across the board, there's one that's sort of very common in all of the practices, and that's Microsoft. And Microsoft is very much at the core of what we do as a business. And throughout this presentation, we're very much going to focus on the Microsoft security proposition and how we can leverage their technology and automation to provide the modern SOC. Next slide, please, David. And again. So we've noticed a real change certainly in the past 2 to 3 years around how our customers and organizations are using IT. I think it's safe to say we've reached a point where we're moving away from what I would call traditional IT in terms of those legacy applications, corporately managed, heavily locked down devices, very prescribed, everybody having the same experience, to very much something that's quite flexible. And this, I quite like this slide because I think it really demonstrates that. We're consuming applications from different vendors, different places, a lot of them SaaS-based applications. Devices are very much a mixture of corporately owned, bring your own, people working from home, working in an office. It's all very sort of mixed up and flexible. And whilst that provides a great user experience and really enables your staff to almost take control of how they want to work, it does prove a lot of challenges from a security perspective. I remember, I think about 10 years ago, went to a conference in London called the BRI Forum, and it was run by a chap called Brian Madden, who some of you may remember or have come across, and he was very much a pioneer in the end user computing space and had some real sort of quite different visions and opinions, some of them quite controversial, on what IT was and where it was going. And I remember sitting in this conference and he was really harping on about how in the next couple of years the operating system is just not going to be relevant anymore. And this was back in the days of VDI being the latest craze. And he was saying, look, we're not going to care about whether it's Windows, whether it's a Mac, whether it's Linux. We probably won't need an operating system because everybody's applications are going to be just provided as a service and hosted externally. It's taken a while to get to that point. He was talking a couple of years. We're probably about 10 years on now, but I don't think we're far off that. And it is very much the operating system is now secondary to the applications and where the data is coming from. Next slide, please, David. We're seeing more and more of our customers move to Microsoft for their security. I think if we had this conversation 3 or 4 years ago and we talked about Microsoft Defender as just an example, many of you would probably have laughed. It very much was not fit for purpose at the time, but we're years on now, and it's probably one of the market leading sort of MDR products out there. Microsoft, certainly from a Gartner perspective, are a top right-hand corner security vendor, and it's very much where they are positioning themselves as a business. We're speaking to more and more customers who have heavily invested in Microsoft E3 and E5 and want to get as much value out of those investments as possible. And that's really where we want to drive to push more and more of those security tools and have customers have an integrated ecosystem. I think one of the challenges I've certainly had with the security marketplace, certainly over the past 5-6 years, is that it's just littered with lots of different products and point solutions, and a lot of them almost based on scaremongering. You must buy this product, you must buy that product, it's going to solve all your problems. And I think the reality is there's not one single product that is going to fix all of those problems. But what is really important is that whatever products you do consume, they really have to integrate, because it's the only way you're going to get true visibility as to where the vulnerabilities are and what's actually happening during a breach. Next slide, please, David. I'm going to move through these ones fairly quickly. We'll send a link round at the end of this webinar for the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. It's a really interesting read and sort of paints a picture of what the landscape looks like. If we move to the next slide. I think one of the key takeaways from here is the majority of breaches, certainly that we've seen since COVID, have been really quite low tech. They're not that sophisticated. Phishing emails, ransomware, it's just really easy for attackers to gain what they want and cause disruption without having what we would probably perceive as a really in-depth technical knowledge. It's not hacking how we probably would perceive hacking. If we move to the next slide. We've seen a lot of nation state threats, so countries such as China, Russia, North Korea, targeting infrastructure type organizations. This morning, just on the radio, poor British Airways, yet again, another security breach, and also the BBC. And this was an interesting one, because I guess it just shows that you can really protect your organization as to the best of your ability. But with these two organizations, British Airways and BBC, it wasn't them that were breached, it was one of their suppliers. So they outsourced their payroll to a third party, and they suffered a breach which resulted in significant number of BBC and British Airways staff's payment details being leaked out on the internet. So not only do we need to think about our own organizations and how we protect them, we very much need to scrutinize the supply chain and have control, because ultimately it's our employees, it's our intellectual property, it's our data that could be leaked via a third party that you work with. Next slide. Devices is another one that we see quite a lot. Organizations, again, spending lots of money, lots of effort, patching infrastructure, putting processes in place, consuming security services and products, but then forgetting about some of the simple things like the printer in the office or CCTV systems. There are a lot of vulnerabilities in some of these, what we call IoT products, that we kind of just plug in and forget about. And we're seeing these in many of the breaches today as the entry points that hackers are using. Next slide. And I guess this final slide, just really what it's saying is there's just some really basic things that we can all do as businesses to try and mitigate as much as possible some of these simpler breaches. Things like multi-factor authentication, modern antivirus, strong passwords, and one that isn't on here actually that I think should probably be right at the top of the list is user training. I think those of you that have done Cyber Essentials Plus, it features on there, but it shouldn't be a once a year tick box. The user training, if you can get that right, and really get your employees thinking about security, that's probably one of the best forms of protection. Next slide. So to finish off and I guess introduce our partners, Chorus, who are here with us today. We carried out quite a bit of market research to try and understand what organizations want when it comes to security and a security service. And I think what we've seen over the past sort of 5 years is certainly that the enterprise space going out and trying to build security teams, but realizing pretty quickly that there's a real lack of skills in the industry. It comes as a cost, and certainly you need a lot of people to really be able to have eyes on absolutely everything that's going on in your infrastructure. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about today is how automation alongside skilled SOC analysts can reduce the requirement for that. We found from the market research that a lot of organizations really wanted the security service to be separate from the managed service provider. It's almost a case of not wanting to mark your own homework and have a third party that is completely separate to whoever's providing your infrastructure, to really keep everybody on their toes and have that sort of honest outside view. But part of the challenge with that is that your security provider very much needs to work closely with your managed service provider, especially when there's an incident. Everybody needs to work together, have defined processes, and be laser focused on mitigating the breach, and then also the remediation and preventative actions that need to be taken to stop it happening again. So we went to the market to look for an organization that we could introduce into our customers as a third party, but have an integrated process whereby we are able to work together so that we can offer our clients an independent security service, but they know that they can work with us, and we have the processes in place, our systems are integrated, and we can provide that sort of closely knit service. And we chose to work with Chorus. Chorus are one of the leading Microsoft security service providers in the UK. And I'm sure Mark will go into more detail about the accreditations and experience they have. But Microsoft is very much at the heart of what they do, the same as us. We share a lot of values in the way we work. And it's just been a real easy integration between our two organizations, and I think many of our customers who consume this service will sort of share that vision that, you know, we are, whilst we're separate organizations, we are very much acting and providing one seamless security service. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's got some great demos and information to share with you all.
Thank you, Mario. That's great. So hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar today. Just to give you a quick intro to myself, and let me turn my webcam on a second. So my name is Mark Jones, and I'm the head of cybersecurity for Chorus. Obviously, as Mario was pointing out earlier, Curve and Chorus are now well integrated, and we've agreed on mutual operations, so we're able to offer SOC services for Curve customers and help them in any way, while Curve are very good at doing kind of digital transformation, security transformation. We can do the managed service piece after that transformation is completed, basically. I have worked for Chorus for about 8 years, and I was probably about 5 years ago, I was the first person in cybersecurity for Chorus. And basically over the last 5 years, we've grown. There's now more than 25 people in the security team, and things have gone very well, in line with what we see in the industry. So, Chorus, a little bit about us. We're historically a managed service provider, so we've been around for about 23 years, and we started off as an MSP on the IT side. Had a lot of skills in security without really formally recognizing them, and we made the decision about 5 years ago to become a managed cybersecurity provider around the time that Microsoft started looking more seriously into the security space. And I really echo Mario's comments earlier in the webinar where he was talking about Microsoft did not start off with a good reputation in the security space. You know, Defender used to be a bit of a joke 5 years ago. It's now it's now a market-leading tool, and certainly you can see Microsoft security tools in, I think, about 9 Gartner Magic Quadrants across the security space now. They very quickly become a market leader, and they've put a lot of investment into becoming that. So basically, we have professional services, and we have a 24/7 UK-based cybersecurity operations center. All of our staff are in the UK, which is something that our customers care a lot about due to, you know, all the compliance reasons. And we have a few specializations. So obviously we have our security partner solutions designation. We also have advanced specializations in threat protection, identity and access management, and information protection and governance. We're members of the invite-only MISA group, which is Microsoft Intelligence Security Association, for the top security partners in the world. And very recently, very pleased that we achieved the Microsoft verified MXDR solution provider badge, which basically means all of our services are audited by Microsoft. They get their architects, their engineering teams to look at what we do, look at the automation we use, look at our threat hunting, look at how we've designed our services, and give them the stamp of approval. So really pleased with that. And we have all the other badges you'd expect from a security provider. If we can jump onto the next slide, please. Great. So I've almost pre-started this, but Microsoft have very quickly become a leader in this space. You know, Mario was saying the same thing. The advantage to having like an integrated stack that's part of a license that's very easy to consume is very attractive, and certainly the reason why we've been able to grow so quickly is because more and more people have turned to that licensing, and they're consolidating on that licensing. No longer do they feel the need to go and buy a different email protection solution, and a different EDR solution, and a different NDR solution. We can really consolidate everything down into that licensing, and it's pretty good value when you do that. And also the tools together are very effective and give you a really good holistic end-to-end view. Microsoft have committed to investing 20 billion in the next 5 years. I think they're now basically described as a security company based on the money and the resources they've put behind it. Gartner think 50% of organizations will be using an MDR service by 2025 due to the increase in cyber attacks. And I think Mario actually had a really good point earlier where he talked about in terms of what we see day to day, it's not that there are more and more very sophisticated attacks or, you know, crazy new techniques being used, although there are in some cases. It's few and far between. Really, the low-level basic things are just happening much more frequently. So I think identity-based attacks have more than doubled since 2021. You know, phishing attempts have more than doubled. We're just seeing organizations being hammered with these low-level threats, and all they need is one slip up. And a big part of this is the time. You know, it used to take attackers a long time to achieve their objectives on your network. Once they gained access, we're seeing those times come down lower and lower and lower. And where it used to be okay to maybe set up your security tools, maybe hook them into your ITSM tool, and kind of your IT team can look after that. Maybe you feel like you can get away without a specialist security team. That's certainly not the case anymore. We know from the digital defense report that Mario was referencing that the median time for a phishing email, a successful phishing email, to lead to data loss, or, you know, an attacker gaining access to some data they shouldn't, is about 1 hour and 12 minutes. Very quick times. We see the same thing with vulnerabilities being published. It realistically takes about 6 hours from a vulnerability being published and a POC being put on the internet for us to start seeing that used against our customers. So the speed in which we need to respond has become really pressing. Another stat, you know, ransomware is obviously a big threat. That's probably human operated ransomware is the thing that we're all worried about. And they say the median time for an attacker to gain from the first endpoint to spread to the second endpoint is about 2 hours, right? So I think it's very important we make the point early on that the speed is absolutely critical. And we're obviously going to talk about automation and the rest of it. And all of it's aimed at speedy response. We need to contain that threat. We need to shut that down as fast as we can. So we've got all these things: increased cyber threat, a much higher volume of attacks. We're seeing cyber insurers ask for more. We're seeing more regulations and compliance come into play, and we're seeing, you know, these distributed networks where people work remotely, and, you know, assets are no longer in this castle and moat perimeter environment. So it's kind of a perfect storm, and the answer is we need to take security much more seriously. If we jump forward a second, so to talk about kind of the E5 licensing, or some people have E3 licensing and add on the E5 security bundle, that's certainly what we recommend for a lot of our customers. And some of these tools are kind of contained in business premium licensing. And if you need any help with that, I'd recommend speaking to Curve. But just to kind of give you an impression of what we cover, this slide is really talking about the attack chain. And it's the idea that no matter what, no matter what the attacker is trying to do, no matter what their goal is, they're going to kind of take the same steps to get there, right? Attacks can look very different. For example, their ultimate objective might be to get into your Azure environment, your cloud environment, and deploy a bunch of VMs to mine coins for them. It could be to just destroy everything they can and delete all your backups. It could be ransomware is very common. You know, there's lots of different objectives. They could be just trying to steal important data to your company. There are a lot of different objectives the attackers can be after, but fundamentally, they're going to take the same steps to get there. So we've got this idea of initial access. So it could start with a phishing email, is very common. We could see a malicious browser add-on or OAuth app that a user consents to that gives an attacker access to their environment. We could also say, you know, there's a vulnerability on a web-facing server, and that could be how they get in initially. And that's kind of the demo I'll give you in a bit. And we'll talk through the kind of a normal attack chain. And we have kind of Defender for Office 365 that covers those kinds of threats. And the attacker is then going to move onto that first device. They're going to try and exploit that first device. They're going to try and get persistence on that first device, so they have a way into your network, into your environment, and that could be either your servers or your endpoints, or it could be IoT or OT devices, as Mary mentioned earlier. You know, your printer, you don't really think about it. It could be a vulnerability. Your CCTV could be a vulnerability. Sensors you have can be exploited as well. And it's something that we've certainly seen more and more in the last couple of years, that we're actually becoming very good at defending email. We're becoming very good at defending endpoints. And the attackers pivot to something we're not so good at defending and not so good at having visibility on. So we have Defender for IoT as well. And then the attacker is going to move to kind of this lateral movement and trying to achieve domain dominance. So basically moving through your network, trying to find a very privileged account, domain admin, enterprise admin, where they basically have the keys to the kingdom and they can do what they want. And once they've done that, it's not uncommon that they'll delete your backups and deploy their ransomware software, or complete whichever objective that's going to come as well. Also in the E5 tooling, we have Azure AD Identity Protection. So this is kind of some clever machine learning stuff where we're looking at risky sign-ins and indicators of unusual behavior in our user accounts, and we can surface those to the SOC. So you think, if I sign into my same laptop every day, and I normally work from home or I work from the office, and I normally work between the hours of 9 and 6, say, if I suddenly sign in from a different location at a different time, that's going to look, even though I could have passed my MFA prompt, I could have passed the password, it's going to look suspicious, and that's something we can flag. And certainly identifying suspicious behavior is a very, very important part of staying ahead of security. And then finally, another piece of the E5 licensing is Defender for Cloud Apps. And this gives us really good visibility, especially when you integrate it with Defender for Endpoint into all the traffic on your users' machines, so we can see where they're going, where the data is flowing. We can see shadow IT, and we can block shadow IT. We can see if users are trying to upload files to somewhere that they shouldn't. That will surface through Defender for Cloud Apps, and we can even put restrictions on what people do. For example, say you have Salesforce in your business and it's sensitive. Maybe you don't want people to access that from unmanaged devices because you can't guarantee the security of those devices. It's not uncommon that we can put restrictions on that. So we can say, if you're accessing Salesforce from a managed device, great, you have full access, you can do what you like. If you're accessing Salesforce from your own device, maybe we'll only give you kind of view access to things. You can't print anything, you can't save anything, you can't upload anything. Those kinds of restrictions are possible through Defender for Cloud Apps. So we have this great set of tools, and the best thing is they all talk to each other. And then underneath you can see Microsoft Sentinel. So Microsoft Sentinel is the seam and the SOAR solution, and we are able to take all of the raw logs from all of these products and bring them into Microsoft Sentinel. So we have whatever they can do natively by themselves, whatever they can do talking to each other, and we can also get access to the raw logs and extend what they can do. We can build new detections based on those logs. We can combine detections. And we can be very clever in what we can do. We can also threat hunt across all those tools and look for things that aren't detected that could be indicators of malicious behavior. And we're also able to look at these kind of insider risk factors. So we can get kind of risk scores on our internal users and look for insider threats. For example, if I know someone's handed in their notice and they've got a month left to work, and we see they're suddenly downloading a huge volume of files from SharePoint, perhaps, that's something that can flag to the SOC, something we can raise with their line manager, perhaps, and we have visibility into that to see those kinds of things. So basically, this is kind of how the Microsoft security stack works together. We at Chorus kind of manage this Microsoft Sentinel layer, and we have access into all of these products to be able to do kind of containment and response activities very, very quickly. If we jump to the next slide. So just to talk a bit more about our managed security services. So we basically have 3 flavors of service, and really the only difference between our services is the scope, what we cover. So we have MDR for endpoints, which is just aimed at the endpoints. I think 70% of successful breaches at some point will pass through a compromised endpoint. So it's realistically the best value is to cover your endpoints, which is what our MDR for endpoint services is aimed at. We will cover managing Defender for endpoint, threat hunting, 24/7 monitoring of that environment, all the reporting, all the service governance, and we will also cover Azure Active Directory. We also need access into identity. Identity is a control plane these days, so we need to be able to take response actions there. Then we move up to our MXDR Advanced and our MXDR Premium services, and these are the ones that have been audited and verified by Microsoft. And these are basically MXDR Advanced covers everything in that E5 license that we talked about and any security tool in Azure. And even if that's kind of multi-cloud, or even if you're in a hybrid environment, we can cover both of those things with just the Microsoft tools. So we do a lot of Azure Arc for on-premise machines, and we can bring visibility to those machines through the Microsoft toolset and Defender for Cloud. And we'll cover all of that in the MXDR Advanced kind of service tier. And then we have MXDR Premium. And MXDR Premium is basically, we'll look after everything, even non-Microsoft sources. A lot of companies want to bring in their firewalls. Perhaps they want switching logs to be brought in. Maybe their virtualization infrastructure needs to be looked after as well. And we'll do all of that. Basically, at MXDR Premium, we're trying to get that kind of comprehensive view. And we also will give customers access to our internal security development team. So any kind of new use cases, any new automation, any new integrations, we can build that for them. We boast really, really efficient onboarding. So typically for an MXDR Advanced customer, onboarding is realistically completed in a day. Everything's done through CI/CD. You give us access through the Azure Marketplace, and we can deploy Sentinel to your environment with all our content, all our automation, all our threat intelligence, and off you go. It's very, very quick. We kind of do these monthly service governance meetings. So every month we're talking about how we can improve coverage, what we've seen, how we've performed, and we're kind of trying to push those metrics to a better place. So we're trying to, alongside Curve, if you have the service with the two of us, then both of us will attend those meetings, and we're both trying to improve your security posture. We'll issue recommendations, Curve can implement those recommendations, and we can kind of all work together to kind of push you forward. Yeah, if we jump on to the next slide. So just to really quickly talk about the service, there's kind of a proactive side to it. So we kind of do those monthly service governance meetings, as you can see. We're constantly developing new detection rules, new playbooks, new automation. Just to give you an idea, for the last year, our mean time to triage has been under 5 minutes across all of our customers, and our mean time to respond has been under 10 minutes across all our customers. When I talked earlier about some of those stats around the average time it takes attackers to progress in your environment, it's really important we stay ahead of those times. So our SLA is really around 30-minute response. And we're really focusing on a really rapid containment action. If it's 3 in the morning and malware hits your server, you want a really, really fast response to that. You don't want to leave the attacker time to move around and perhaps spread to other areas of your network or other servers or endpoints. So we're really focused on that. We also do vulnerability management, threat hunting, and proactive cyber threat intelligence. Proactive cyber threat intelligence is essentially we have access to a lot of indicators of compromise through our membership of MISA. We get threat intelligence through Microsoft. We're part of the kind of CISP, government cybersecurity information sharing partnership. And we're also members of a bunch of other sources of threat intelligence. Where we have very high confidence in those indicators of compromise, we can basically push those into your Defender tools, and we can say block these things if you see them. An example being, if there's a ransomware actor and we're aware of their infrastructure, we know the IP addresses that belong to that ransomware group, and we can put those into your Defender tools, and we can say block any connection to this if you see it, and we can kind of get ahead of that a little bit, which is really valuable, as well as doing the obvious, constantly checking that threat intelligence against what we've observed in your logs. And then we have the incident management side of things. And Mary talked about this as well. That would look like joint, well, if we can't solve the issue or contain the issue ourselves, then it would, or it turns into a more significant breach, then that kind of triggers a war room response, a known process between ourselves and Curve, and there's kind of regular communications. At the end, there would be a security incident response. That's not very common. Most of the time, our analysts can resolve that alert, or they can do some kind of containment action to mitigate that threat. And then we're going to escalate, as in let you know we've taken an action, or sometimes we're escalating to get more information or to clarify something. And now we'll jump into the demo. So if I share my screen a second, I think you might need to make me presenter. Thank you. So hopefully, if one of you guys can let me know you can see my screen.
Yeah, you're all good.
Thank you very much. Cool. So for the demos then, I was going to kind of show an example of an attack and kind of what we can see on the Defender side. So if I really quickly just explain the scenario here, we basically have a Windows Server 2012 R2 server. This server is a web server. It's a Python web server. It's deliberately misconfigured, and we can basically, I'll show you the steps we can take to exploit it. So on Friday, I attacked this machine. I was able to get some pretty scary access to it, and I will show you what that looks like, and then we'll kind of pivot back to look at how good the tools are and what they picked up, and talk about maybe what our response would have been in the SOC. So we'll run through the videos first. So we're going to start here. This is kind of our initial scan of that web server. And this web server is onboarded to Defender for Endpoint, so it's not defenseless. It's in Azure, it's in Defender for Cloud, and we can see what ports are open. So obviously there's some issues already. We can see that port 80 is open for HTTP. I know it's a Python server because 8080 is classic. RDP is open, SMB is open. We can see those things on our scan. Now I'm very interested in what's on port 8080. And you can see very quickly we're going to have a good idea of how we're going to get access to this machine. So there's no vulnerability present. This is just a misconfiguration. And this is very small, probably quite difficult to see, but I basically found a file, a batch file, and it says there's a scheduled task to clean up the database log files, and there's a little command to delete some log folder. And I can tell, okay, that's probably running on a scheduled task. If I'm able to replace that file with something of my own choosing, then I just have to wait for that scheduled task to run, and it's going to run what I want it to run, right? So I think there's going to be some more enumeration of what's on this web server, but I already have a good idea of how I might be able to get access onto this server. And this is a really good point. It's not enough to just monitor like known exploits or known problems or trust your security tools. We also need to pay really close attention to when there's configuration changes that make our infrastructure less secure. And I might show you an example of that in a moment. So we kind of have our idea of how we're going to gain access. We're going to kind of do a reverse shell using Python because we know this is a Python web server. I have my reverse shell here. I'm basically saying connect to my machine on port 1234, and we're going to put that in the same file as we can see on the web server. And the idea is the scheduled task will run. It will now, in fact, run our reverse shell, and we can connect to it from our attacker's machine. So we're just kind of creating the file here. We've got the file, we can see there, it's got the same name as the one on the web server, and we're going to use basically wget, and we're going to try and patch the file onto that web server. It's not very well secured, so we're going to be able to do that. So next we're showing uploading the reverse shell. And you can see we're using HTTP put, and we're just trying to replace that file with our version of that file. And we know that that scheduled task is just trying to run that named file. So it should run our Python reverse shell. So I'll just skip forward a bit. You can see that we've written that file. If I click on that now, you can see it's replaced with our Python exploit, our reverse shell. And now we're going to try and connect. So we know that we're waiting for that, that scheduled task to run. It's going to try and connect back to our machine. I'm now opening Metasploit on my attacker's machine. Metasploit is a very well-known library of exploits and vulnerabilities I can exploit. It's very easy to use. This is far easier than you'd imagine. You see, I need to set up a couple of things. It's asking me to say, what's my listener address? And what port am I trying to list on? So that's the IP address of my box. We've already said 123 is the port I want to listen to, and then I'm going to misspell options a couple of times, and I hit run, and now we're listening on that port basically, and we have this reverse shell which I can save. I can call up at any point. We're going to wait for that scheduled task to run, and now I have a shell access onto that server. So you can see I'm on 2012 R2 now. I'm the account sec admin, and I'm on that server. And from here, I can look for ways to elevate my privilege. So I think in this example, we're using WinPeas. This is something I could just pop onto the machine and run. And it's like a known library of ways to exploit misconfigurations in a machine that would help me gain further privilege. But you can see that I've already managed to get a reverse shell. I can recall that shell. I can save that shell on my attacker's machine. And already, you know, if this belongs to your organization, you're in a bit of trouble at this point because I have access. I'm going to look for kind of admin credentials, and I think you'll see me run the enumeration script here to see what I can exploit or see how I can gain further privilege on the machine. See, I've uploaded that to the same spot, and because I have shell access, I can just run that from my shell. So back to the shell, and I'm going to just run that. That's a very known tool, WinPeas. I'm going to run that, and you'll see it fly through trying to look for registry keys I can exploit. If there's any unquoted paths in scheduled tasks that I could take advantage of, it's basically going to give an attacker a very quick idea on what I could do to this machine to get further along. You know, and this is, I could also do another scan from this point, see if there's anything else on the internal network that I could move to. I can also look for any kind of credentials that are on this machine. Perhaps I can get admin credentials off the machine, and I could try and crack those offline or try and replay those against other machines on the network. And you can see, obviously, we need a very quick response to this kind of thing. This needs to be shut down as soon as possible. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the attacker side of it looks like. And now we're going to move over to what we see in Defender for Endpoint. And I'll start off by saying it's very noisy. What I was doing then pings a lot of alerts. You know, we see a lot of what I just did is picked up, and it's made very obvious through Defender for Endpoint. But the fact that it alerts isn't enough, right? It isn't enough to say it alerts, and we have really good visibility into that. Everything I did then, Defender for Endpoint is very much onto me, and knows I'm doing suspicious things. And this is really the value of EDR. If we just look at these alerts, you can see most of them from that kind of sequence are EDR detections. So we're really looking at behavior, and we're getting these kind of suspicious behaviors that are happening. Sensitive data was extracted from registry. I've tried to export the registry, and very few of them are actually traditional AV. It's only where I've tried to use kind of known hack tools where AV has kind of stopped that and protected that. Most of these things are more, it can see suspicious behavior and it's flagging that things that look like an attacker attacking a machine are happening on the machine. And that's a really key point. Our service and our detection needs to be based around identifying suspicious behavior. If it looks like malware, if it looks like an attacker, it probably is an attacker. And we can't really rely on traditional antiviruses anymore. It's too easy to get around them. So these are kind of the alerts that raised. I have a lot of alerts here that would focus on the SOC. Do you think even if you're pushing these alerts to an infrastructure team, are they going to be able to respond to them in that kind of hour, 2 hour time frame? Probably not, especially if they're busy doing other things, and they might not have the skills to look through this and make sense of it. If we jump into one of these alerts, and this is kind of really showing you how good the tools are, we can see we've been given a risk level of high because a lot of suspicious behavior is happening. We can see the accounts, we can see what server, we can see recommendations on what we need to do. We can see the exact timeline from the kernel, what's going on this machine, what's happened. I can look through and see everything that's happened on this machine in great detail. These tools also allow me to take automated response actions, so I can kick off automated scans. I can kick off collecting more forensic information for the analyst to look at. I might say this is suspicious and I want to isolate this endpoint, as in cut the networking. I might want to restrict app execution, where I say only binaries that are signed by Microsoft are allowed to run until I know what's going on. And we have all of these options, you know, and it's a lot of alerts. So it's important to point out that Microsoft do a lot of this correlation for us. So what's going to surface to our analysts is this kind of multi-stage incident. It's clever enough to know that this is all happening, same process, from the same IP address, the same account, the same server involved. It's going to kind of correlate all of this into one incident. And this is what our analysts are going to be looking at. You know, they're not going to have to look through these 10 disparate alerts and put them together. It's just going to surface as one. It's going to kind of connect the dots for us. And even if that's across multiple tools, it's clever enough to put that together. The tools combined are very, very impressive. And what we can do is kind of see those all in Sentinel. I'm very aware that we're kind of pushing the time. David, is it okay to show one more thing, or do we need to stop?
Yeah, I think we're good. I mean, obviously, yeah, this was scheduled it was 10 to 10:45, but we can. I think there's people still on. If people do need to drop off, they can do. They'll get a recording straight after. But if you need to, we'll finish to the end and then finish around 10.
No problem. Thanks. So if I just show you one last thing, just because we talked about automated response, I'm just going to show you a really, really quick example. So imagine this is a customer environment. This is the server I just was showing you compromising. Let's say when we talk about kind of insecure configuration, I'm just going to throw this rule in and I'm going to allow RDP. So I'm just exposing a management port to the internet. And now if you think, if I'm on an infrastructure team, Azure isn't going to stop me doing that. It's going to let me do that. In fact, the only thing it's going to tell me is that's not a sensible thing to do. And it does that by giving me this little warning sign. But you know, mistakes are made. People are going to make configuration changes that are not secure from time to time, and we need to have a really good awareness of that. So when we talk about what's possible through automated response, I just want to give you a really quick example of this kind of thing. If we see this kind of change, this is going to actually trigger an incident on the SOC, and we're able to see this in our customer's environment. So if I jump into our demo Sentinel now, I'll show you an incident. It looks a bit like this. We can see this configuration change, and we can see an RDP port is exposed to the internet. Now, if I know that's something that we never want to see happen for that customer or yourselves, then we're able to kind of build these playbook responses for this incident. So if we run a playbook here, I have a playbook that is basically going to reach out to that environment, look for either port 22 or port 3389, and strip that from the NSG config. So if I run down here, I've got remove exposed management port. I'm going to run that quickly. Oh, I'm in the wrong place. Let me go to the right place. Just bear with me a second. Here we go. So if you can see some of our enrichment. There's also a useful thing to point out to you. But if I run that playbook very quickly on a subscription that isn't disabled, we'll let that trigger. That's triggered successfully. And then if I go back across to this customer environment, and if I have a look at this NSG again, you can see already that RDP rule has now been stripped out from the configuration. And that's something I triggered, right? So we had the detection to say RDP had been exposed. I can trigger the playbook to say, oh, remove this configuration. And that's one example, but realistically, what we do in production is if I know that we never want to see that port exposed to the internet, say you use Bastion, say you use jump boxes, say we've already established with the customer that's something they never want to see, then we would just tie that playbook to those types of incidents. And you're going to get a much faster response, as in whenever someone exposes RDP by accident, it's going to trigger an incident, the playbook's immediately going to run and correct that. And then we'd obviously be able to see through like the Azure activity logs who made the change, what happened, and escalate that information to you. And that was it, basically the last thing I wanted to show you. So I'll hand back over to David.
Thank you very much, Mark. Right, well, we'll just close off then. So no, everyone, I appreciate we did run over slightly, as always the way with these things, but lots of great content and hopefully some insights to take away. So Well, we did have a couple of questions, but I appreciate time. People probably need to pop off because they've got a call at 11. So what we'll do is, there was a couple of technical questions in there, Mark, so I'll get them across to you if we can share them with the people who asked them afterwards with the response. And then obviously Mario mentioned the digital defense report, and another couple of things that we talked about. So we'll share around the asset, the report, and some other really insightful pieces to kind of help you on your cybersecurity journey afterwards. So all that leaves me to say is thanks for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.